World War III has already started. Russia has declared war on all of NATO, not just Ukraine. All NATO countries are culpable because they are sending tanks and weapons to fight against Russia. English-speaking soldiers have been caught in multiple videos fighting the Russians. The US just openly extended troop deployments another 9 months in Poland and Romania. This includes the 101st Airborne and a 2-star general. They even said the mission is to check Putin from advancing further if needed. We are at great risk for a false flag to get NATO into the Ukrainian conflict. Zelensky even attempted one already, which I will get into later. My point is that you should be very skeptical when some attack or tragedy occurs which allegedly justifies US invasion. A false flag is actually a very common tactic. A country needs an excuse to go to war, so they often manufacture one. When you were a kid in school, and one child threw something at the teacher, they blamed someone else. They'd point to another kid and say, "He did it." That was a false flag. It isn't a wild conspiracy theory to say these things happen. The Germans in World War II faked an invasion by Polish soldiers as an excuse to invade them. They dressed up dead prisoners in Polish uniforms and littered the border with their bodies and rifles. They even interrupted regular broadcasting with a fake news alert announcing that the country was under attack. It was declassified in the 21st century that the Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened. US intelligence made it up to kick off the Vietnam War. 9/11 was the same thing. Authorities found the passports of the terrorists on the ground. This was the proof that it was Arabs that attacked us. We don't have to get into the physics of Building 7's control collapse, or the perfect blind navigation 2 pilots did to get there. I think most people would agree that the WMD excuse to invade Iraq was a false flag. Those satellite photos could have easily been faked to take out Saddam. This is also a dangerous time because we are running the same playbook we did before the last World Wars. It was years before the US entered World War I and World War II. The Allies fought with US-made weapons and food. No German ever had a Thompson machine gun or Curtiss Warhawk issued to them. It was obvious whose side we were on. The sinking of the passenger ship Lusitania, which brought the US into World War I, was completely the fault of the US. The Army was caught using civilians as a shield to transport weapons to England. They hid artillery rounds and ammo in the cargo hold. Germans not only warned the US they would sink the ship next time they did this, they even ran articles in the New York newspapers warning random civilians. It outlined exactly when and why they intended to torpedo the Lusitania. None of that mattered after they sank it, because he who controls the narrative creates reality. Every child who studies World War I only knows German speakers bad, English speakers good. As I've mentioned before, the US was fighting in Vietnam for years in a semi-secret capacity before the war officially began. They needed an excuse to escalate the war beyond the Special Forces units training and fighting guerrilla style, so they manufactured the Gulf of Tonkin. This is why I am extremely disturbed by videos of American accented troops fighting in Ukraine. They even admitted that one US Special Forces soldier has been killed in the area. US troop movements and weapons shipments seem to be positioning for a major response. The Russians know all about this. If I can Google that Ukraine is getting NATO tanks arriving on the border, so can they. Ukraine recently claimed the Russians fired a missile into Poland. 2 men were killed at a power plant. This was Zelensky's brief false flag attempt, in my opinion. Whether he reacted to an accident or staged the thing from the start, Zelensky used this to try and get NATO to declare war. Zelensky claimed that it was a Russian attack, then eventually admitted it was friendly fire from Ukraine. NATO basically laughed at him and instantly knew it was an accident by the Russians, if not staged. A Russian attack on Poland would not be 1 missile strong, and 2 deaths are not the reason to spark off World War III. Recent polls show that support for US involvement in the war is low. 80% oppose it. Americans are even tired of sending money to Ukraine. Most everyone in the US is hurting from inflation and gas prices. The constant announcements of several more billion being sent overseas is infuriating. That's why if those in charge wanted to go to war, it will have to be something big. Expect something violent and shocking. I don't think a satellite photo of some labs is going to cut it this time. Russia just conscripted another 500,000 troops. Russian men are required to serve in the military after high school, but obviously the implications are much worse in this wartime footing. They aren't playing around. There are many rumors and reports that Putin may be ousted by a coup or some other illegal manner. I heard a pundit recently theorize that this is because he is holding back the so-called big guns in this war. Westerners assume Putin's ousting by his generals would be an anti-war sentiment, but this converse option seems plausible also. Many of the struggles Russia's invasion force is having can be chalked up to Putin's reservation. He has kept back Russia's fifth-generation tanks and jet fighters. He doesn't want them to be captured by the West. Their tanks are nuclear-powered and do not give off a heat signature to satellites. NATO tanks are still running on diesel. Russia has a card up their sleeve in their intelligence department. They captured every example of US drones and tanks from the Afghanistan war. Iran funneled them back to Russia for a small finder's fee. Putin knows the US is ignorant of his latest MiG fighters and tanks. He hopes their capabilities will be a shocking success against an unprepared and uninformed NATO force. I still predict once the ground freezes this winter, a major attack is in store for Ukraine. That is because then their vehicles can move freely on the ground. If not, they may wait for the spring. We can only hope and pray this doesn't entangle the rest of NATO, and that the two countries resolve it peacefully.